Welcome back to Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. As we kick off the final quarter of the year, all eyes are on the final months. But in terms of trends, we're not just focused on the key holiday shopping season, but there is a lot going on in terms of the macro landscape with ongoing geopolitical as well as labor stoppages that could have far-reaching implications. Well, overall, the global e-commerce market is expected to reach $4.8 trillion by 2025, with growth anticipated in the following years. Now, kicking off our discussion this morning on e-commerce as well as mobility and trends, for some of the Mag 7 names, I am joined by Shweta Khajuria, Internet Analyst at Wolfe Research. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, first and foremost, let's start out by looking at e-commerce. So when we talk about this, it does encompass cross-border commerce as well as borderless business and international online retail. And more importantly, when we think about this, it's not just a luxury for organizations or just one strategy. So Shweta, can you give us an understanding of the current total global e-commerce market?
Yeah, sure. First of all, at a high level, excluding China, the global e-commerce market is several $trillion, approximately, call it $5 trillion market. United States is a fairly good percentage of that market. Globally, e-commerce market is expected to grow in the low double-digit percentage range. Call it 10 to 12% range, and in the United States, more in the high single-digit percentage range, because the penetration levels here in the US are significantly higher than in some of the other countries in the world. Currently, e-commerce penetration as a percentage of total retail in the US and in the developed market is expected to be at around 25-ish% at a high level. And there's still, when the penetration is still that low, there's still runway for growth for e-commerce. Not every category is that low penetrated. There are some categories like electronics and books that have been being sold online for a long time that are much more penetrated. But then there's also grocery that is 12 to 13% penetrated. So at a high level, we are looking at 25% penetration levels in the developed markets and lower than that in the underdeveloped markets. And as a result, we think that there's still a runway for growth. Just as a proxy, when we think about markets and penetration levels, digital advertising and or online travel, both in developed markets, have penetrated about 65 to 70% of the total market. That is, 65 to 70% of total advertising or total travel is now digital. And we have seen a lot of growth in that market. And similarly, we think that e-commerce will follow. It's just not yet fully penetrated. So we think that there is still at least double-digit growth at a global level to be had on a sustainable basis until we see these penetration levels kind of start to plateau.
And before we move on to growth, I do want to ask you, what do you think are some of the reasons behind what we're seeing in terms of the trends that you mentioned?
Well, first of all, it depends on the country. In the developed world, some of the trends that we have seen, especially in the recent past, well, first of all, it was COVID. Before COVID, every year we were seeing penetration increase maybe 1 percentage point or so each year. But then COVID obviously experienced a huge pull forward of demand where penetration spiked because we didn't have any choice but to order online. We couldn't go out, stores were closed, and even grocery was being ordered online. And so the penetration levels, at least in the United States and in developed markets, spiked, and to some degree in international markets as well, just because of COVID. Post-COVID, so that was a huge step change, and people started getting habituated to ordering online. Post-COVID, the penetration level has come in a little bit because people are living more of a normal life and going out and buying items as well. And so the penetration level now is still higher than what at pre-COVID would suggest if COVID had never happened. But versus the COVID level, it's still kind of come in because people are going out. So the COVID pull forward was a huge step change in penetration levels. The second driver for penetration, especially in the non-developed markets, is access to internet and access to mobile phones. So as more and more people and populations get access to mobile phones and internet, the penetration levels for e-commerce should rise at a pretty good level. And we kind of saw that with United States and developed markets many, many years ago. The third driver is infrastructure, where even if you have mobile and internet and access to online ordering, but if the country or the state does not have the infrastructure built for delivery in a more efficient way, that penetration is going to start slowing versus maybe in markets where infrastructure is built for pretty efficient delivery as well as payment. So the infrastructure includes not only fulfillment of the items, inventory, storage, and delivery, but it also includes payments where there is a safe way to transact online as well as offline for those underdeveloped markets where online payments is not picked up that much. So it all goes hand in hand, and these are some of the step changes that we will see drive penetration further depending on the market we're talking about.
And Shweta, building on what you just said, when it comes to e-commerce, the post-pandemic environment has indeed shifted from the early days of the pandemic. And as you mentioned, whether we're talking about cybersecurity or payments or infrastructure, both in the developed and developing nations, we have seen a shift from the early days of the pandemic. So when it comes to the top household names and platforms, especially here in the US, such as Amazon, Etsy, eBay, what has changed and where do you see the trend moving?
Yeah, that is a great question. A lot has changed depending on which platform we are talking about. Let's start with Amazon. Amazon today, we think, is over 40% of the US e-commerce market alone. And so to a large degree, Amazon reflects the market itself. So the growth rate we're seeing at Amazon largely impacts the overall e-commerce market in the United States. Amazon, what we have seen with Amazon are a few things. One is COVID certainly helped pull forward the demand for online shopping. That is true for Amazon, that's true for eBay, Etsy, everybody. But specifically with Amazon, what has helped is also the value proposition that Amazon offers with faster delivery. Increasingly so, what Amazon has done is they have increased their investment in fulfillment and their infrastructure, whether it is outbound or inbound fulfillment. Specifically outbound so far, but they're working on their inbound fulfillment infrastructure that has allowed them to deliver their items even faster than just the traditional 2-day promise. Greater and greater percentages of households in the United States are getting their items faster. And one would think that as they're getting items faster, maybe Amazon is running at a loss on a per item basis, but that's not the case. Because what Amazon has done is very efficiently rerouted its infrastructure, whereby even on a per item basis, they are not running at a decreasing profit levels. They're actually running at improving efficiency because the transportation cost is lower, because the fulfillment cost is lower as they're bringing items closer to the households. And that's why not only are they benefiting from faster delivery, but they're also benefiting from lower costs and more efficient routes. So what that has done is that has allowed consumers to be more habituated to Amazon, even in the non-discretionary category, which is their holy grail, where so far a lot of discretionary categories have penetrated with Amazon, but they are still trying to penetrate the non-discretionary category, specifically grocery. And as more and more consumers get habituated because they get same day, same hour, or within a few hours of free delivery, they're more habituated to buy non-discretionary items where Amazon is not as penetrated or does not have that much share, and it is allowing Amazon to grow faster in those categories, thereby helping them grow their overall retail. So even in macro environments where maybe we are starting to see pressure on consumer spend among lower household income consumers, and we saw that with what Dollar General or Dollar Tree have said, where lower income households are actually getting pressured. But why Amazon is being able to offset that maybe a little bit better than an eBay or Etsy is because Amazon is is able to deliver items faster for consumers, and Amazon is very well diversified where they have both discretionary items and non-discretionary items. So people are still wanting to buy their food and pantry stuff as well as grocery, and Amazon is taking share in that. So that has allowed Amazon to continue to grow at a relatively healthy clip, even when we're seeing maybe some softening of consumer spend, especially in the lower income households in the United States. Now, what has happened with eBay is they have evolved their strategy over the years, where what eBay has done is, first of all, simplified their platform dramatically. The user experience on eBay is very different today, even if you are a seller or a buyer, than it was many years ago. And so with that development alone, more users are using eBay more frequently. The second thing that eBay has done is that they have changed their strategy to differentiate themselves from Amazon a little bit, because it's very difficult to compete with Amazon on a head-to-head basis. So in order to differentiate themselves from Amazon, what eBay has done is taken a vertical approach. Over the past several years, eBay has focused on key verticals that have been growing relatively well for them. So by taking some of the buyers that were not high quality buyers and focusing only on the buyers that are more frequent buyers on eBay that are higher quality for the platform, and focusing on certain verticals that are actually doing really well. For example, parts and accessories. They're a market leader in that for online parts and accessories, for luxury purses, for luxury sneakers, non-new in-season items across the board, which accounts for majority of their GMV. Focusing on certain categories where they can have a leadership position, they have allowed themselves to grow in those categories. And that's why eBay not only saw that benefit during COVID, but is still now growing in expected to grow in the low single-digit percentage range, still lower than overall e-commerce, but allowing them to grow because they're focused on these focus categories that are growing 4 to 5% for them. And they will keep expanding those categories. Right now, it's only 30% of their GMV that these growing verticals account for, but over time they could get to even 50%, and that could allow them to accelerate growth. So that is a fundamentally different strategy that eBay has taken upon itself that is different from Amazon. It's allowing eBay to grow and not decline in the overall e-commerce market. And then finally, for Etsy, Etsy saw a huge Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yes, I'd like to hear about Etsy as well.
Oh, well, I was just going to finish my thought on Etsy. Basically, Etsy has evolved dramatically. They brought on a CEO and CFO back in the day in 2017, well pre-COVID, when nobody cared about Etsy at the time, and the new management team at the time, which is still their management team today, completely transformed the platform up until COVID by making dramatic product changes to the platform, and that allowed them to grow up until COVID. Then COVID hit, and Etsy saw a huge step change in demand and a huge change in their GMV growth profile, or GMS growth profile, because a lot of buyers were going onto Etsy to buy items that they were not used to buying items on Etsy. When everything else was closed, all buyers were going onto Etsy. The differentiation for Etsy at the time during COVID was that most of their sellers are very small businesses they have 5 to 10 people tops at their company, and they are very flexible and dynamic, where during COVID, if there was greater demand for masks or for items that were very specific to COVID, these sellers could change their businesses and cater to those demands, because they could these are local sellers who could fulfill the demand that was not available when items were not available elsewhere. And so Etsy took advantage of their very dynamic and flexible business model, where sellers can start making items that are in real time, that are in demand for their consumers, that allow them to really gain share, and saw a huge spike in demand as well as their top line. But that was a pull forward in their demand, and now it's a completely different environment where Etsy is having a tougher time to grow and their top line is declining. in part because there's greater competition from even the Asia-based players like Temu or Shein. In part also because consumer spend is pressured and there are only so many places that a consumer is going to spend, and they're going back to offline as well as Amazon and other channels. And then in part because Etsy does have a concentration of categories. About 6 categories account for 85% of their overall business, which is very high concentration. So because of the mix of all these issues, Etsy's top line is declining currently, but the idea is that they are focused more on changing their product initiatives, not only in the US, but also abroad in international markets that are important to them, by focusing more on product and then focusing on marketing to drive their top line growth. So the goal for Etsy really is to flip from being declining this year to hopefully, with product changes, their strategy change, and changing competitive and demand environment, to start seeing positive growth in 2025 and beyond. Back to you.
And of course, when it comes to these 3 companies, the strategies are quite different, as you mentioned. And pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, we are seeing a shift. So I'm glad you made the distinction between these organizations. Now, I very quickly want to move on over to mobility. So let's start out by taking a look at Tesla, especially as we're already in the month of October. Now, we know that Tesla's sales have faltered, and as such, CEO Elon Musk has been refocusing his attention as well as investor attention on its ambitions in terms of robotics, artificial intelligence technologies, and apparently he believes this could help Tesla's market value to as high as $30 trillion. But of course, October 10th is coming up. That is next week, and they are set to unveil a prototype, right, of a fully autonomous robotaxi. So tell us a little bit about your expectations and what you anticipate.
Sure. Well, first of all, just full disclosure, I'm not a Tesla analyst because Tesla is covered by auto analyst. I cover internet companies like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, etc. So Tesla's robotaxi day is incredibly relevant for ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft. But as far as Tesla's robotaxi day goes, it is important. There will be a lot of eyes and ears on that day, people wanting to listen in on what they will disclose. Our expectation is that, first of all, they'll probably disclose 2 different prototypes. One that is fully autonomous, that does not need human driver without a steering wheel, even if it is not ready for commercial use at scale currently, but they have a functioning model that they want to release and show the world. And then the second model is a better version of autonomous vehicle with a steering wheel, but better software, better technology that needs a human driver, but has better autonomous settings whereby they can use it in a more autonomous way than we've seen in models prior. Second is that we don't think that the new model is going to cost about $25,000, which is what Tesla, it sounds like, is shooting for. But general expectation and even our expectation is that it'll likely be priced a little bit higher at around $40,000 range. And then third is that we do not think that their fully autonomous model will be ready for commercial use, just like we are seeing Waymo. Right now in San Francisco and in areas like Phoenix and LA, you can actually use Waymo as a ride-sharing car without a driver on the road, and it's out there for commercial use. We do not think that Tesla's fully autonomous car will be ready for a commercial use anytime in the near future, even if they've built that technology, because the liability is large. If they are not fully ready and they do get into an accident, there is a huge liability on their brand equity as well as on people's lives. And so we think that they will probably phase it when they're very, very ready to launch it on a commercial basis. So we think that we are still maybe at least 1 to 3 years out in terms of them launching fully at scale.
And when we think about the market here in the U.S., it's quite different from other parts of the world. So tell us your expectations for the future of mobility here stateside, not just in areas such as the Bay Area, but other metropolitan areas.
Yeah, well, first of all, for autonomous vehicles, it is not as much about federal regulation. A lot of times people think that it is federal or state regulation that is going to stop autonomous vehicles from scaling across the country, not only in Silicon Valley. And that may not necessarily be true because in more than half the states in the US today, state regulations allow for testing of autonomous vehicles for commercial use already. So if I wanted to carve a path with an autonomous vehicle from California to Florida, I could do that because those states that are interlinked are allowing for it. So over time, what we think will happen is almost all states within the United States will allow for autonomous vehicles to be tested for commercial use and be used for commercial use at scale in the very near future. The second thing is that right now, even in areas like Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, in Phoenix, in Los Angeles, where Waymo, which is part of Alphabet and Google, is used as a ride-sharing company on its own, it is still geographically locked in certain areas. For example, in San Francisco, Waymo is not doing airport rides. It's not going on highways. It's kind of locked into certain geo fences where it is either in the city or certain areas outside of the city. And so those areas will start expanding, and perhaps Waymo will start running routes directly to and from the city and the airport in the locations that are already available, as they start thinking about expanding into newer geographies. Just taking Waymo as an example, the challenge that Waymo faces is capital intensity. It is very expensive to have these cars on the road at scale. Right now, Waymo has approximately 700 cars. They are expanding into a new city maybe once every 2 to 3 months with maybe about 100 to 200 cars. And that takes some time to expand into different cities around the country, even if regulation allows for it, because it's very capital intensive. Currently, with all the LiDAR and radar and the car itself being Jaguar, it's estimated to be around $125,000 per car with all the equipment and the car itself. And it takes a lot of time and testing to expand and scale, and even to get to 20,000 cars up from 700, which it will take maybe 2 to 3 years. And that's not going to make a dent because you need millions of cars. That's why Tesla's proposition is perhaps more adaptable, because if Tesla figures out fully autonomous robotaxi, then these Teslas can be at scale with a full $40,000 model, millions of them on the road at scale, and the supply could be significantly higher for these vehicles, but they are just not ready yet.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming months, not to mention years. But because you mentioned Google, I do want to get your take on two names in the Mag 7. So Google versus Meta, what is your take on both of these companies?
Well, from an investor perspective, when we think about it in the medium to long term, we like Meta over Google, in part because not only Google has this Department of Justice overhang on the stock, but it's also because fundamentally the search experience is changing. Back in the day, it was you and me, everybody going on search, and we predominantly use and currently use Google. However, and so that's why Google has enjoyed a vast majority share in search. But the next crop of people coming in, the Gen Zers and the next generation of users, and including the change in behavior in search behavior of us, you and me as well today, is shifting away from search into more conversational search and conversational AI, whether it is ChatGPT or Meta's Meta AI or Perplexity, you name it. And so the bottom line is that the search experience in itself, even if conversational AI is additive because you are doing more longer searches than what you're doing on Google, even if it is additive, that search experience in itself is fundamentally changing, where Google is in a position at best to defend its share and at worst lose meaningful share on a go-forward basis in search, which is their bread and butter, which is a big part of their overall business. And so that's why the the fundamental value proposition of search may be shifting over the long term. And as an investor, that there is certainly some terminal value risk to Google's business model. Now, Meta, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily, because it's the largest social media platform, all along there was this risk that, at some point users are going to get tired of Facebook Blue and then Instagram and then WhatsApp and Messenger and what's next. And there was this terminal value risk. But that has mitigated a little bit because how Meta as a company has evolved over the past few years, and specifically over the past year or two, where they have built an amazing business with a very large billions of users. But more importantly, what they have evolved into is they are by far the biggest social media platform. And they have positioned themselves as one of the leaders in AI with their Llama 3 model, Llama 3.2, and soon to be Llama 4. And if they can maintain industry leadership in Gen AI, they could build several other business revenue opportunities on top of the business that they have already built. And that's why we are more bullish, because over the next 1 to 10 years, Meta is positioned to get new revenue sources from business to business messaging, from monetizing Meta AI, and even gaining share from Google search. And then ultimately potentially monetizing Llama, their AI model itself, whether it is with compute or revenue share with enterprise cloud providers. So the bottom line is their terminal value actually got enhanced, and they could build several new businesses on top of each other, while Meta doesn't necessarily have to compete against anyone else as a social media platform, unlike Google that competes with search with conversational AI. So the outlook arguably has shifted more towards Meta for a reason, and that this is the primary reason.
So for Google and Meta, I think it's very important to keep our eyes on what the bread and butter are for both of their business models. So since we're talking about bread and butter, I do want to wrap up our discussion by talking about online groceries. We have less than 5 minutes here, so I know you mentioned some of the factors that are keeping penetration levels low. So how do you envision the future of online grocery, and how do you think it'll evolve in this post-pandemic environment?
Well, first of all, online grocery right now is only 12 to 13% penetrated in the United States. It's one of the most under-penetrated categories within retail. Part of the reason why we think that is the case is because these retailers run a very low margin business. Their profit profile is very thin. And when they partner with a partner like an Instacart or a DoorDash or an Uber Eats, what happens is they have to raise their prices for those platforms because they have to pay fees to those platforms. Given that their margins are low, they're not going to have the same price for most of the items on these platforms. And as a consumer, when you look at Instacart or DoorDash or Uber Eats, you know how much your milk and eggs and bananas and your regular groceries actually cost in store. And as an average consumer, maybe convenience is a huge advantage because you get it delivered to your home, but that may not be the only differentiated factor, as price is a huge deal, especially in an inflationary environment where prices are going up for milk and cheese and nuts and all the regular items for grocery. So when you see the price on these platforms higher than what you know the price is in store, that could limit the penetration of online grocery than some of the other categories. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying that it could be slower than what we have seen in the rest of the categories, because this could be one of those factors. Where I think we are headed is as larger platforms like Walmart and Target. Walmart has a huge market share in grocery in the US. It's over 40% in grocery. And as those platforms start offering online delivery and online pickup, and consumers start getting habituated to those platforms, then I think that penetration will start rising, even with Instacart and with DoorDash and with Uber Eats. That's a huge factor in terms of price parity. And then the second reason is also as there's greater awareness and habituation and value proposition from these platforms. For example, on Uber, you can get rideshare you can get restaurants, you can get grocery. As that value proposition from these apps continue to grow for a reasonable price, the frequency of purchase will also increase, and that will drive penetration further. But that may be slightly of a slower move than we have seen in other categories. And that's it. Back to you.
Okay, Shweta, well, thank you so much. We are all out of time today, but thank you so much for giving us all of your insights and giving us such a comprehensive look into all of these segments.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
My pleasure. And that will do it for Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on SamPro You can check out our show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you here tomorrow morning.